Hello, New Mexico, and welcome to another episode of Around the Roundhouse, a podcast featuring the policies, politics, and you guessed it, big personalities of the land of enchantment from our beautiful state capital here in Santa Fe and beyond to every corner of New Mexico. I'm your host, Daniel Chacón. Our guest this week is State Land Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard, who is a Democrat serving her second and final term in office. A former member of the State House of Representatives, Garcia Richard is the first woman, the first Latina, and the first educator to serve as State Land Commissioner. During her tenure, the State Land Office, which oversees 9 million acres and 13 million subsurface acres of state trust land, has brought in record revenues through leases and royalties, money that benefits New Mexico's public schools, universities, and hospitals. Commissioner, thank you for being with us today. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Daniel. It's good to bring my big personality to your podcast. I didn't realize it was about big personalities.
I love big personalities, and so I'm so honored to have you on the podcast today. Thank you again. Commissioner, I was watching a video of you of some years ago, and it was really fascinating to me to hear about the history of the State Land Office. Can you give us a little bit of a history so folks can get an understanding of how the Land Office originated and also what the Land Office does?
Absolutely. So that was actually a great introduction that you just did, Daniel. A lot of folks don't know that we even exist. We call it the most important position in government that nobody even realizes that we elect,
Yes.
So essentially, if you go back even before statehood, so back in 1898, there was the Ferguson Act that was created, along with then the Enabling Act that created the state of New Mexico in Congress. Both of those pieces of legislation led to the creation of the State Land Office. So we actually even had a land commissioner long before we had the state of New Mexico. It was the territorial land commissioner at that time instead of the state land commissioner. And that individual was charged with using the lands that were granted to the state of New Mexico from the federal government. So essentially, it's 4 sections out of every township and range. That equals up to the 9 million acres you were referring to. And we were to use that land as working lands, basically to create revenue for New Mexico's public schools, universities, and hospitals. New Mexico at that time, and even today, because our population is so small, our land is so vast, we don't really have a tax base with which to support those government services like our public education. And so we use our working lands to raise money to do that.
And one thing that folks may not know is that your office saves taxpayers a great amount of money annually. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
I absolutely will do that. So we always calculate this amount just so we can let folks know just how we're supporting them and how we're supporting tax-paying New Mexicans. My first year in office, we raised the first $1 billion into the State Land Office. Then a couple of years after that, we raised our first $2 billion into this office. Now we are set. It looks like we're probably going to round out our first $3 billion, Daniel, this next year. And so essentially what that means is we are saving the average tax-paying New Mexican household $3,000 in taxes that they do not have to pay per year.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure folks will be very happy to hear that. Commissioner, let's turn to a topic that's been in the news quite a bit lately, and that is Jeffrey Epstein and Zorro Ranch. A company owned by Epstein held 2 leases for state land in the vicinity of the ranch that were issued in 1993. Why did you terminate them in 2019, which was a year after you were elected?
Yeah, and it wasn't exactly a year. It was actually in that first year that I was elected. We got wind that there was some folks kind of digging around the records at the Santa Fe County in that area. They called our office, asking about the ownership of 2 particular parcels, asking if it was state land. Turned out that wasn't state land, but it kind of perked up our ears. And my press person at the time, her name was Angie, she thought, you know what? I wonder if there is state land in the footprint of Zorro Ranch. And remember, this was at the time Jeffrey Epstein was basically, he had been arrested, I even think, at that time. He, of course, later died in jail, but this was all around when this was hitting the news. And so she thought, I bet you anything. We didn't know. We came into office not even knowing that there was state land at Zorro Ranch. She did a little bit of digging, and sure enough, turns up these 2 leases. So we combed those leases for compliance, like we do every single lease here at the land office, no matter what it's for. And we found that these folks were out of compliance with a number of our rules and regulations on how to properly lease and steward state land. So we were able to have a lawful reason for canceling both of those leases. I actually tore the leases up on television and really made that statement like, you're not going to be using state land for these criminal and nefarious activities. Well, Cypress Inc., which was an offshore company that was owned by Jeffrey Epstein, they actually fought us on the cancellation at first. And they kind of sent their lawyers after us saying, hey, you have no right. These are legal contracts. You can't just cancel them willy-nilly. And we laid out all of the lawful reasons that we were able to do what we did. And they finally backed off.
And Commissioner, how much land are we talking about? What were the leases for, and what has become of that land since the termination?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. So essentially, the Zorro Ranch is thousands of acres large. But like a lot of the big ranches like that in New Mexico, the way they can be contiguous, have contiguous area and operations, is that they have either state or federal land leases within that footprint, okay? And so what happened was when that ranch was sold, and I believe it was sold from the King family, that's all public knowledge, those leases then got what is called assigned. They got basically written over to Cypress Inc. and Zorro Ranch. It's interesting to note, and I know you're a reporter at the New Mexican, Clara Bates. Can I just give a shout out to her real quick? She's like one of the reporters that's actually like digging into this stuff and really trying to come up with the truth for New Mexicans. So I very much appreciate her reporting on this. But basically, if you look at the footprint of that ranch, you'll see that the state land is kind of used almost as a buffer. Some of it is kind of surrounding the ranch, almost at a border-like area. And then there's the donut hole portion. So you asked about the acreage. It's close to 2,000 acres. It's about 1,800 acres of leased state land, part of this larger thousands of acres ranch that was used to kind of buffer the activities that were happening there.
And were they grazing leases?
These were grazing leases. So we've got about 7,500 of these that are, throughout the state. And essentially, these are ranching families, some of them who have ranched for generations, who use this land to run cattle. And so that's ostensibly what these leases were for as well. However, our records indicate that there wasn't really a true cattle operation. There was a ranch manager at Zorro Ranch, but the number of cattle was not what you would typically see at a ranch that was supposed to be of this size.
And Commissioner, how were they out of compliance?
So one of them was that very reason, is that they had, purported to be using it for grazing, but in fact, it was almost like a token grazing operation. They had, a few cattle, but they weren't running a cattle operation. So they weren't using it for the intended purpose, is one. And let me just let you know, and New Mexicans know, that grazing land is priced fairly nominally for people. We want to encourage our ranching families that have been in this business for years. We want to support their operations. And so we don't charge them, an arm and a leg to graze this land. So he was getting it at a real reasonable price. I'll just say that. So that's one thing. It wasn't in line with the purported use. Okay. The second thing was that we had a requirement that part of the paperwork for establishing the ranch is that you had to have a disinterested third party basically sign an affidavit as to the conditions of the ranch. Basically, you had to go outside, maybe a neighbor or someone, you would ask them to verify the conditions of the ranch on an affidavit. That's called an appraisement form. Okay. And the person that had signed the appraisement form for Zorro Ranch was Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't think that anyone can, at anyone's stretch of imagination, think that Ghislaine Maxwell was a disinterested third party in the Zorro Ranch operations. So there were a number of this kind of non-compliance issues, kind of skirting the rules, really thinking that they could get away with not following the rules, like we ask every other New Mexican family to follow when they are using a public resource like state land.
And Commissioner, just as a follow-up, what has come of that land since then?
So the ranch was sold, and it was sold to a gentleman in Texas. Huffines is his name. And the original folks who bought that ranch, they wanted now to lease the state land. Well, we, having learned our lesson on Cypress Inc., we started to ask questions like, well, who is behind the San Rafael, ranch that has bought this property and this and that? And we were getting kind of some obfuscated answers. So we decided we declined to lease the land out to the new owner. Since that time, we have, partially because of investigative reporting, uncovered who the individual is that actually owns the land. And we sent the individual a letter asking for access onto the state land. You may remember, Daniel, that I tried to gain access onto the state land when it was still owned by Zorro Ranch and Cypress Inc. and was denied access to the state land. So we are basically in the process of developing a field visit, and we will be out to that land for the first time now in 7 years. We haven't been out there.
Commissioner, I know you mentioned your previous communications person that kind of started to do a little digging, but why do you think that it took the State Land Office so long to find out what was happening there and revoke the leases?
There's a couple of reasons for that, Daniel. So the very first and kind of most disturbing reason, really, is that a lot of the activities of Epstein and Epstein's ring and everyone who was involved, and there are New Mexico politicians that were involved, there are national politicians, those folks wanted access to whatever they felt Jeffrey Epstein provided, and so they were going to protect those activities. Whether or not they actually contributed to the activities, I don't know. But they did want to protect those activities. They wanted to protect those individuals. So that protectionism, I think, lent itself to the secrecy and to Epstein being able to just kind of use the state land as he very well pleased, because there were people protecting him. That's the first reason. The second reason is that until my tenure at the State Land Office, even if we had the most well-meaning of land commissioners, there wasn't that real culture of compliance, due diligence, making sure that every single acre of state land was being used to its intended purpose, was being cared for, was being stewarded in the way I know and you know New Mexicans want us to steward their public resource. So those kind of two reasons, I think, really contributed to this being done in New Mexico.
And Commissioner, may I ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you name names? I mean, who was protecting him?
So, this is all in the public record. This is not like Stephanie Garcia Richard's fever dream, okay? It was the King family, first and foremost. It was the governor at the time, Governor Richardson, very much protecting this landowner, protecting this particular person and his use of state land. Okay. Those are two names that just kind of off the top of my head, and folks know that was really part of how he was able to operate here.
Given that experience, did you implement any changes in your office afterward?
Absolutely. So lessons learned. We now require every single individual that wants, particularly a grazing lease, but we do this for all of our leases. We have to know if it's an LLC that is leasing, because that is part of our rules that an LLC can lease state land. We want to know who are the individuals behind that LLC. People can't just now put the name of a company. We need to know that there are individuals behind that LLC. We do due diligence research into those individuals. And then if it's an LLC that has been created outside of the state of New Mexico, or corporation created outside of the state of New Mexico, we require now, this is brand new, if you're going to lease land from the state of New Mexico, you need to be registered with the Secretary of State here in New Mexico. And so I think if we had had this in place back in the 90s when all this came to be, We might have been able to kind of dig into who these individuals were. New Mexicans would have known who these individuals were, and maybe we could have pushed back a little bit more. But the hindsight is in 2020. I mean, we now know a lot more than we did before, and basically we are trying to ensure this never happens again.
Okay. Commissioner, in February, you called on the U.S. Department of Justice as well as the New Mexico Department of Justice to investigate allegations that 2 girls were buried in the hills surrounding Zorro Ranch. Do you have any information that you can share with us about what's happening on state land in relation?
All I know. So let's just rewind back to 2019 when we first called for the cancellation of these leases, and we kind of tried to give the signal to law enforcement, whether it be federal or state law enforcement, like, we want to cooperate with you all. We want to make state land available for you all to do your investigations. To my knowledge, no land at that time, the state land had not been investigated at that time. Fast forward now, 7 years later, we get this dump of Epstein files, and there is this allegation, and it wasn't 2 girls. It was, the allegation said there were bodies. Okay. Bodies buried is what it said, in the hills behind Zorro Ranch is what it says. And that hills behind Zorro Ranch is partially state land. So when I saw that, as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh crap, what if state land was used for this purpose? I'm the person stewarding this land on behalf of New Mexicans. They trusted me with this land. And so I need to make sure I know what's going on that land. So that's what prompted us to call for the investigation. We had a nice interview with the person who's in charge of investigations for the Attorney General for the New Mexico Department of Justice, kind of asking about our process and kind of laying the groundwork for an investigation. And then very soon after that, we were in talks with the New Mexico Department of Justice, not the United States DOJ, New Mexico Department of Justice, to grant them access to state land for the purposes of investigation. That's as far as I know, Daniel. I don't know if anything's been uncovered. I don't know what they've actually, I think they had been talking about using cadaver dogs and that kind of thing, but I'm not sure what they used at this time.
Okay. Commissioner, thank you so much for providing that explanation and shedding more light on how that unfolded. I did want to switch topics a little bit. The Trump administration recently announced plans to end federal protections in the 10-mile buffer zone surrounding Chaco Canyon National Historical Park. How concerned are you?
Incredibly concerned. I mean, this is a disaster. This is a disaster, plain and simple. There is no way around it. Essentially, for those who have been to Chaco, personally, but even if you haven't been, this is sacred land to many of New Mexico's tribes and pueblos and nations and communities. This is, if you want to think about putting a pump jack in a church, that's what the equivalent would be. A pump jack in a cemetery, that's the equivalent of what this would be. This is desecration of a sacred area. Now, there is already oil and gas development in this area, but what the threat is opening back up to new oil and gas development, continually desecrating the area. So, yeah.
Commissioner, one of your first acts in office, you issued an executive order to remove almost 73,000 acres of state land in that 10-mile buffer zone from future mineral leasing. If I'm not mistaken, that was your first executive order. And then you've since reissued that executive order that would remain in place until December of 2043. Do those executive orders not have standing?
So I wouldn't describe it as not having standing. Essentially, an executive order does not have, it's not a legally binding contract, kind of like our leases are. So I talked about, our grazing leases, we've got oil and gas leases. Those are legally binding contracts. When I talked about canceling the Epstein lease, we needed lawful reasons to cancel that lease because it's a legally binding contract. The issue with the executive orders is as long as there's a land commissioner in office that wants to abide by an executive order that a previous land commissioner wrote, it's in good standing. The issue becomes if someone wants to challenge that executive order or just not follow it, really, not follow it. You don't even have to challenge it. You can just not pay attention to it. You can not follow it. And so in order to get around that, Daniel, what we have done, and this is going to give your viewers a real taste of the power of this office that I don't think people even realize. What we have done now is we are fundraising around creating a legally binding document to have a negative easement put in place. So essentially a land use restriction into Chaco for the 70,000 acres of state land for any new oil and gas development for 20 years. And you can imagine, because oil and gas is very lucrative, that is a pretty penny. That contract is going to come with a price tag. And so we're fundraising around that price tag right now. And we are going to, we've chatted with the Pueblos, we've chatted with the All Pueblo Council of Governors about putting it in the name of Pueblo governments in New Mexico. But we won't be fundraising from the Pueblo governments. We'll be fundraising from everyone who cares about Chaco, all the advocates, all of the nonprofits, to pay for this legally binding contract for 20 years, no oil and gas development on the 70,000 acres of state land.
And so this would counter anything that the Trump administration might want to do?
So it wouldn't counter, but it will disrupt. I will say it will disrupt. So in the oil and gas world, you've got places where you want to drill or develop a large swath of land, large acreage of land. If the state land is removed from that area because you can't drill on the state land, that will disrupt the ability to develop some of the other land around it.
Okay. Commissioner, I also wanted to ask you about something else related to the Trump administration. What's the status? And it's interesting that you have served as a commissioner under the first Trump administration and now in the second one. But what is the status of the border wall as it relates to state trust land?
That is such a great question, Daniel. And this actually goes even before my time. The land commissioner before me was Aubrey Dunn, if you all remember. He was not a Democrat.
All right.
He's been a couple of different things. He was a Republican, then an independent. He was not a Democrat. And he was battling the border wall on state land himself. So there is what's called a Roosevelt reservation along the border that essentially does not allow activity from the federal government. The Trump administration is just kind of disregarding the Roosevelt reservation. They are disregarding state land status, and they are continuing to trespass on state land and bring equipment there. There's lots of activity on state land that is unauthorized. We have not signed a lease with the Customs and Border Patrol for a state land. We have not authorized any building of a state land, of a border wall on state land. However, the Trump administration continues to flagrantly break laws around the border, both environmental laws and just really acknowledging land status.
And so what are there not legal repercussions or legal avenues that you can pursue?
So unfortunately, because this is the federal government, if the federal government decides to condemn the land and seize it for a public purpose, they are able to do that. So we are fighting that right now, Daniel.
Okay. Commissioner, you're, as I mentioned earlier, you're serving your second and final term. What do you hope to accomplish in the last months of your tenure? And are you happy with the job that you've done as land commissioner?
Daniel, I've been the greatest land commissioner the state has ever had. I think from now on, and I really hope that the next land commissioner realizes what we have realized because of the juncture where we are with climate, with our energy future, with New Mexico's future, with our public land, with the state of our water and our land and our wildlife here in New Mexico. This office is becoming more and more essential and crucial to people's everyday lives. And we realize that, and we acted accordingly. And I hope that future land commissioners continue that trend. I am happy with the job I've done. I feel like we have been able to really take some bold swings and land those swings, but also we have a very well-run agency. I'm sure you know about my Top Workplace Awards. We've got a very, very low vacancy rate here at the State Land Office. We've got a low turnover rate. And in state government, that's saying a lot. But we've been able to do some big things like the raising of the royalty rate we were able to do. We've built renewable energy to the tune of 7 times the amount of renewable energy that was here when I first started. That includes, wind and solar and all kinds of new renewable, sustainable energy for New Mexicans. So you mentioned the record revenue that we've been able to earn. And so we've had that tight compliance on use of state land, but we didn't sacrifice the revenue. We still were able to make those record historic revenue numbers. So before I leave office, there are a couple of things I'm wanting to do. One of them is a bonding rule change.
Yes.
So essentially, this is the money that covers, this is like the insurance policy that covers all the oil and gas development in the state on state land. Well, right now, each lease has a requirement to be bonded up for $10,000. I mean, that's not even the coverage of closing one well, Daniel. So we are proposing to increase that to $150,000. And then the complete cap, the ceiling that you could ever cover any lease, no matter what was on it, on oil and gas would be $25,000. As it currently stands, we're going to increase that to $40 million, Daniel. So that is a rule change we have to do. It's an administrative rule. Right now it's published. It's out for public comment. We've met with industry experts. We've met with advocates and environmentalists on this rule. And that's one of my big hopes, is that we get that wrapped up before I walk out the door.
Okay. Speaking of walking out the door, last year you suspended your campaign for lieutenant governor. And I'm curious, what does the future hold for Stephanie Garcia Richard? Are politics in your future?
Right now, Daniel, I'm really focused inward on my family. As you know, I did suspend my campaign because of the health of my husband. He's right in the midst of treatment right now. And so I'm trying to be a good caregiver for him and really focus my attention on caring for him and wrapping up this last term of my office.
That's what we do in New Mexico. We take care of each other. We take care of our loved ones. Commissioner, 3 candidates are vying for the Democratic nomination for state land commissioner. What do you think of the caliber of those candidates? Will you be endorsing any one of them?
So I'm excited about the caliber. I am disappointed I was not able to convince any woman to run. I certainly hope I am not going to be the first woman land commissioner and the last. So that is a disappointment of mine. But what I've told the candidates, and I've chatted with them all, is I would only endorse if there was kind of a red flag that popped up and I thought that maybe we should keep someone out of office. As it stands now, I think all of those candidates bring their strengths.
Okay. Any advice to your successor? What kind of challenges or opportunities will they face after Stephanie Garcia Richard hangs up her hat?
So essentially, every road runs through the state land office. You will learn a new thing every single day here. And then the other thing is, no day will be the same. You'll deal with the small things up to the large, big policy advancements. So this is probably the best job I will ever have, no matter what other job I ever have. This will be my favorite. I have really loved this job. I love the people at the state land office, and this has been a very rewarding job. I'm so grateful I got to do it.
Well, and we're grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have gotten to work with you, and I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate you spending time with us. Is there anything I'm missing to ask you, or anything that you would like to add?
Have you told your viewers that I tried to hire you as my press person when I first came in?
No, I had not told them that.
No, Daniel, thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you again, Commissioner. And as always, thank you to our viewers and listeners for tuning into Around the Roundhouse. Join us every week as we talk to newsmakers with big personalities or even medium personalities, but we're lucky to have someone with a big personality. So join us every week as we talk to newsmakers by subscribing to our podcast through Spotify, Apple, YouTube Music, or obviously wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest developments, including our ongoing coverage of the Epstein case and all goings on at the state land office, follow our coverage online at santafenewmexican.com, where you can also subscribe to our political newsletter, The Roundhouse Report. Until next time, I'm Daniel Chacón, and this has been Around the Roundhouse.